to you for being so willing to attend today for me to present my thesis. During my talk, I want to mention first how I decided upon my topic, and then how I went about researching it for the past 5 months. Then I'll define some key terms so that you can better understand my word choice throughout my paper. And finally, I will present my thesis by section in order to display my findings that Islam, in fact, does not have nor practice a universal view towards homosexuality. Until a friend of mine mentioned homosexuality, I had never put the two words together, Islam and homosexuality, much like most of the Muslims I refer to in my thesis. My friend began to tell me about her studies of homosexuality in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India during her Southeast Asian class, but I wanted to expand her understanding into something more encompassing of the Islamic world. The initial questions that naturally came to mind included, how do the followers of Islam see homosexuality? What does the Quran and Muhammad's day relate to this issue? Is this anything like Christianity's view of it? And how are Muslim homosexuals treated? It was then that I decided to focus my thesis for the Middle East Studies certificate on homosexuality and Islam. However, I was not initially sure of the direction I should go in. I spent about a month tossing around ideas related to broad topics on honor crimes, Qur'anic interpretation, and then smaller topics focused on individual states or people. The most significant part of my initial research kept leading from all of these smaller topics, and that became my thesis, that while the universal view of homosexuality in the Islamic world is that it's dishonorable and illegal, there seems to be pockets of tolerance. Through this topic, I could focus on all of my smaller ideas while considering the Quran itself in an attempt to fully grasp homosexuality, how homosexuality is seen and dealt with in the Muslim Middle East. Before explaining my research methods and findings, I would like to mention some terms for further elaboration and clarification. Homosexuality. When I refer to homosexuality, I'm including both the physical and sexual acts of being gay and the emotional relationship aspect. This can be compared to sodomy, in which I am only referring to the physical side of being gay, and is the term the courts use to prosecute homosexuals. Extralegal. This word is mentioned frequently in my legal sections within the paper. By extralegal, I mean enforcement or rulings outside of the legal sphere of society and inside the social sphere. All of the Arabic words used within the text should be defined, and if there are any more term clarifications, please feel free to address them at the end of my talk. My initial researching for this thesis started at the very beginning. I began checking out books on Islam itself. John Esposito's book, What Everyone Needs to Know About Islam, was my first. I wanted to start from the ground up, researching Islam and the Quran itself before starting on any type of scholarly work related to the social or legal aspects of Islam and homosexuality. From my initial research, I began to find the leading names in research on my topic, including Brian Whitaker, Scott Kuhl, and Stephen Murray and Will Roscoe. In addition to books, which made up most of my base research, I spent a good amount of time on the Human Rights Watch website, as well as other internet databases and encyclopedias. All of my quantitative data was either compiled by myself through a survey of various data collections or retrieved from the World Values Survey database. I chose my topic subheading, the legal systems and the social atmospheres in Islamic societies pertaining to homosexuality, after a careful evaluation of trends within the Muslim countries towards persecution and tolerance of homosexuality. It is from an analysis and survey of these works that I derived my central thesis and eventually my paper. My thesis, which states that while homosexuality is considered dishonorable and illegal throughout the Muslim world, emphasizes the small and growing minority of Muslims within the Middle East willing to tolerate and accept this type of behavior. A look at the original Quranic writings towards homosexuality is where this discrepancy in tolerance derives itself. I found that the Quran does not outline a distinct view towards homosexuality like most other transgressions. In fact, the wording is so convoluted that most scholars disagree with one another on the degree of severity, the punishment, and even whether or not the Prophet Lot's people were really engaging in sodomy to begin with. These discrepancies translate into daily living within the Muslim Middle East, allowing for varying interpretations of homosexuality in a legal context and a social context that varies from state to state, community to community, and individual to individual. These variations range from tolerance and leniency, homosexuality, to very strong opposition, and in between both extremes. They are shaped by the political and social context each Muslim is accustomed to, and can change throughout an individual's life depending on the type of acclamation they procure. Additionally, within Islam, I highlight a variety of different means for emphasizing this disparity, including membership to either Sunni or Shia, as well as the different schools of law, whom each interprets a transgression differently. This discrepancy in a single ruling from the religious sense translate into discrepancies within the legal context of states, as well as human daily interpretation, causing a lack of uniform opinion. Within a legal context, a state-by-state comparison will show the differences in each one's statute, the punishment for sodomy, as well as the legality of it. The best connection between these differing interpretations can be seen when comparing the legality and punishment for sodomy with the role of religion within each state. Those governments that allow for more direct role of religion within a government tend to have a higher degree of punishment for sodomy, while those that prefer a more secular government have less of a penalty. The table I'm referring to, of course, is found on page 9 for reference. The difference in punishment can also be attributed to the convoluted Qur'anic interpretation of Lot's people. Because the transgression does not have a specific punishment, like most do, it is difficult to discern the correct punishment allotted. Additionally, most legal interpretations of Islam, especially when the religion is closely tied to the state, reject the transformation and adaptation of laws to the people because Sharia law is divine law and theoretically immutable. Those states willing to redefine the legality of sodomy or enforce a lesser punishment are often met with dissatisfaction by much of the representative body because the law is seen as so concrete. The second influential factor of interpretation I mentioned within my paper is that present within Islamic communities within the Middle East. Here it is interesting to compare acceptance of homosexuality with westernization and modernization, and conversely, rejection of homosexuality as traditional and conservative. In many Islamic communities, the acceptance of homosexuality is seen as a transgression away from Islam, and therefore a violation of religious norms. The ideal Muslim works to retrogress time so as to be closer to the Prophet Muhammad, and if the acceptance of homosexuality is seen as a modernizing aspect of the religion, it will be shunned by many neo-traditionalists. This pull between Eastern and Western civilizations is emphasized within the idea of Occidentalism. Here, I discovered that, like Orientalism, Occidentalism allows for a negative connotation to be associated with certain Western ideas and ideologies in order to retain a strict Islamic following and possibly deter young generations from moving towards progression and westernization. Where there is a strong association between modernized nations and homosexuality, there is also a need to combat homosexuality within a community outside of the legal environment if neo-traditionalists feel it is not accurately being dealt with. These enforcements are carried out through honor crimes, a harmful part of Islamic society that is scarcely mentioned publicly. Through a need to preserve a family's name within the Islamic community, relatives or members of the community will seek infliction of emotional and physical pain upon an individual who is violating certain Islamic laws, including participation in sodomy and homosexuality. This comes from a strict interpretation of the Quran and Lot's people, and is usually overlooked by the courts, especially with those with close ties to Islam. The World Values Survey, comprised of a network of social scientists located throughout the world, conducts public opinion surveys on a variety of international issues. In my thesis, I highlight 6 questions asked to various Muslim Middle Eastern countries towards their opinion of religion and state and homosexuality. These surveys further emphasize the discrepancy in tolerance of homosexuality and display a lack of uniform interpretation. Of the people surveyed, the findings suggest that that while most Muslims would prefer statesmen with strong religious beliefs governing them, they would like a more balanced legal system instead of one relying solely on Sharia law. Additionally, there was not a unanimous yes towards whether or not politicians who are not religious are unfit for public office. This suggests that while there may be a significant portion of the Islamic population who are traditional and would prefer a strict tie between Sharia law and the state, there is a movement that can be quantified that prefers a moving away from traditional Islamic ruling at the legal level. Socially, the World Values Survey polled Muslims relating to their opinions towards homosexuality. Answers to these questions were more divided than the previous ones. But again, there was a small minority that did not agree with the statements regarding homosexuality. In general, most Muslims agree that homosexuality is not justifiable. However, there are those who did choose to answer never justifiable, chose not to answer never justifiable, ranging from 0.1% of those polled to 15.5%. Also, when asked whether or not they would have a problem with a homosexual neighbor, the answers were split between whether or not the petition mentioned homosexuality at all. Finally, it is important to reaffirm that when asked whether or not religion was important within their lives, most every country polled agreed with as a majority except Azerbaijan. These findings suggest that while most Muslims regard religion very highly, some do not insist on legal systems governed by Islamic law, and not all agree that homosexuality is dishonorable and illegal. The implications for this discrepancy are emphasized throughout my thesis, ranging from positive and negative consequences. Negatively, many countries are participating in illegal infringement on human rights in order to obtain homosexuals within their country's community. These neo-traditionalist governments are allowed discrepancies in legal rulings because there is no uniform judgment on punishment for the crime. Studies done in Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Morocco highlight these legal discrepancies and the inhumane torture and arraignment activities being implemented without difficulty. Additionally, a lack of uniform ruling at the state level allows for individual interpretation to vary and contributes to harmful extralegal behavior that is not heavily punished by the courts. The Human Rights Watch has identified this type of behavior in countries including Iraq and Turkey. These findings suggest and enforce a statement Brian Whitaker made in 2007, featured in my paper, that criminalizing homosexuality is a bad use of the law because it's not a crime that harms a third party like murder does. Such laws can never be effectively or legally enforced. It is usually very difficult to provide evidence that an offense has taken place. Laws against homosexuality promote crime rather than combating it, and laws against homosexuality have a damaging effect on society as a whole. The growing number of individuals becoming more accepting of homosexuality are also faced with persecution, thereby preventing a large movement away from condemnation of homosexuality to occur. However, there are a growing number of small regional organizations taking hold over the issue in a few Muslim Middle Eastern countries, including Lebanon, as well as a larger electronic movement taking place over the internet. As globalization continues to influence traditional Islamic communities and spur modernization efforts, issues like homosexuality will continue to be controversial. While most of Islam may believe that homosexuality is dishonorable and illegal, there is no concrete ideology with regards to homosexuality, and the continuing lack of will further encourage behavioral and legal discrepancies, thus aiding in the progress and reform efforts throughout the Muslim Middle East. Yes.
Did you write that for a class originally?
Mm-mm.
Okay, just curious.
No. Were you thinking of something from your class?
No.
Mm.
Not particularly.
Yeah, most people that I've talked to within the Middle Eastern discipline say that they want to elaborate on paper that they've previously done, but I didn't have anything that I thought was interesting enough to continue. I wanted to start something new.
You started in a new direction.
Yep.
So we can grill you now?
All right, let's do it.
Well, I enjoyed reading your